Okay, let's bring in the panel now, and I am joined by Sky News host Gary Hargrave and lawyer and commentator Caroline Di Russo. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, I want to stay on The Voice and the topic of the Liberals, and they're pushing the government to release more detail. I reckon that Peter Dutton needs to come out and take a firm position on this. But, Caro, let me ask you what you think, Caroline Di Russo.
Look, I think at some stage that they will have to come out with a position, and whether that there is a hard position or, and look, in the Liberal Party, you can always cross the floor, you can always vote your way. So, you know, a hard position in the Liberal Party is a totally different creature from a hard position in the Labor Party, where you get expelled if you accidentally think for yourself. But I think as far as Peter Dutton goes, look, I think that he will probably come out with a position at some stage. I'm not sure if that stage is just yet. I think that they should be pressing for more detail. They should be asking, because I think it's fair that Australians at least get the opportunity to make an informed decision. And we've heard, like you said, plenty over the break about how this is going to unify and make us stronger and yada yada, without anything even remotely tangible about how that happens. So I think, you know, it's a good way to keep pressure on Labor for the moment. And look, Labor is going to come out with their re-education program, very Orwellian, which is obviously is 100% for the yes case. I don't think there's going to be anything critical in it. But it'll be interesting to see what they're going to spend $200 million on, given that no one seems to know what this is going to do, and they don't want to tell any of us. So I think spending $200 million on, well, it's just good manners, I think it's going to wear thin pretty soon.
But, Gary, the Nationals have already said no to this. Yeah. So why are the Liberals having such a hard time coming to a position on this? And if it's only the Nationals who are mounting a hard no case, then doesn't that almost guarantee that Labor gets a big win on this?
Well, James and Caroline, great to be with you. Happy New Year to both of you. But look, there's a long way till August, mate. I heard what you said about it, 8 months, got to get your skates on. But in all seriousness, the great national day, one of our great national days of unity is coming up at the end of this month. Australia Day, a day in which Australians of all backgrounds, beliefs and all generations, all sort of experiences can come together to talk about what makes it great being an Australian. Look, I was not a member of the Cabinet, but I was Philip Ruddock's 2IC in that Department of Immigration, Multicultural and Indigenous Affairs at the time of those Cabinet papers. And it was our very firm view in those days, and it should still be, and it will be Peter Dutton's view. I have no doubt about it. And we'll probably hear about it around Australia Day, that what brings us together is much more important than the things that are going to divide us. Now, Labor and Albo in particular, they're just running this lazy game. They're quite happy to have division. They're quite happy to try and make sure that everyone is saying the Liberal Party is somehow or other the issue here. But it's Labor that's proposing this thing. And I think there's a lot of doubts. And if in doubt, you should say no. It's pretty simple. But the reality is we are already singing with one voice in this country. We are already a voice of many different people from many different places, many different generations, many different experiences. And, mate, like a tapestry is stronger when there's many threads at work. And if you're going to start to single out one thread, then you're going to weaken the whole framework of our society. This is a very, very dangerous proposition. And I think Peter Dutton will, after Albo's done all the talking, done all the yakking, digging himself deeper into a hole, drowning, if you like, on the rhetoric. You hand him a glass of water when he's drowning. That's what you do in politics. So, Albo, just keep yakking. It's all going on the record, old pal. It's all going on the record.
OK, well, we'll see. We'll see. 8 months, maybe a long time, maybe a short time, and we'll see what comes up around Australia Day, which we'll be discussing a bit later on in the program with the great Anthony Dillon. But let's shift gears here a bit, guys, because Treasurer Jim Chalmers had a lot to say today. He talked about supply chain crises in China, but he also called for improvements to the country's migrant worker program after warning our aging population and falling fertility rate could diminish our workforce. Now, Caroline, shouldn't we be looking at improving our own friendly policies like baby bonuses and tax breaks rather than simply relying on overseas migration when, you know, once you get done building all the infrastructure for them, you're not necessarily talking about any real productivity gains?
No, that's quite right. Well, look, I think part of it is tax breaks, and I'm one of those people. I'm more than happy to say I think something like childcare should be tax deductible. Just do it, get it over and done with, and move on. This whole idea of more and more subsidies is just garbage, because we know that subsidies never bring down prices. But I think it's more than just the family policy. I actually think it goes back to things like housing affordability, because once you've bought a house and you settle down, then you can have your family. If people think that they're always going to be in this temporary sort of situation, they're a lot less likely to make really permanent decisions. So I think it's partially something like childcare. I think a big part of it is housing affordability. I think that's a massive part of it. And as far as immigration goes, look, there has been some really interesting comments in the media over the last couple of weeks from a couple of finance commentators who have said, well, look, Australia is probably going to miss a technical recession next year just because we're going to have such high immigration. Now, James and Gary, you both know that I'm a fan of immigration. Otherwise, my family wouldn't have ended up here. I'm more than happy with immigration. My preference is that we talk about like stable and long-term immigration. You know, people who come and stay and make Australia their home, I think that's really important. But we do have to be careful that, you know, just jamming people into the country when there's already pressure on our hospitals, pressure on our ambulances, pressure on a whole range of infrastructure, that just trying to keep us out of a recession and trying to keep that aggregate GDP buoyed, then in fact we don't actually lower our living standards for everyone who's already here.
And I mean, Gary, this brings up another question too. You know, if we are entirely focused on bringing in skilled migrants whenever we need a job done, does that mean that we're automatically going to start neglecting our education system? We've seen education results declining for 2 decades in this country under both sides of government in power. Do we need to focus more on, you know, raising our own skilled Australians so they don't necessarily need to import so many skilled migrants?
Well, James, the problem is there's nothing for anybody to do in this country. We've made electricity so expensive that we don't make things anymore. We're making it so difficult for farmers to grow stuff because of all the green tape associated with everything that they do on the land. As a mate of mine in far north Queensland said, we just about have to fill in a form to mow the front paddock of his house block on his farm. I mean, we are slowly but surely doing ourselves in as a country. And no skilled migrant is going to want to come here because there's actually nothing for them to do. And if Jim Chalmers, here we go, Jim, here is the magic pudding that you are desperately searching for. Give them something to do. Start building stuff that makes sense. Start building big water projects. Start building new coal-fired and maybe nuclear-powered power stations. Start doing things that bring clever people to this country, because as the Americans started the space program 60, 70 years ago, James, it was all about the technology add-ons that came with that, not just so much about getting people on the moon or wherever.
Correct. Well,
and so we're not doing any of that in this country. Not doing any of that.
Speaking of technology, I want to talk about the next story, which is a real hoot. This comes to us from the UK and an electric vehicle owner in England. And I want to just read you through a couple of bits of her story. This family was going to visit their grandma, which was supposed to be an hour or 2 drive away, but due to the freezing cold conditions, their trusty little EV was draining battery quicker than usual. So they went to charge on the way, and then they got all delayed. And at one point, one of the 2 electric chargers was broken, and 3 cars were queuing for the one that was still working, she writes. After finally getting a spot, the family went in to have a coffee, and then they went out to check how it was going, and they, quote, found that the charge had stopped. And this had transpired because another driver had plugged into the system. Now, the article goes on and on and on, but basically, guys, I mean, this is what they want for us. They want us all to use these electric-powered vehicles, which, you know, have all of these problems. We've seen problems here, and somehow we're supposed to be getting more electrons into the system to charge them when they're, you know, cutting off all the stuff that provides reliable power. Caroline, is this just the definition of insanity?
It's absolutely ridiculous. And look, I'm sure EVs are totally fine if you never go more than about 15 k's from your house. But this story's in England. Think about how many Englands you can fit into Australia. And then think about the logistical difficulty of doing this. And that there is just talking about the range of the car and how much the range is reduced when it's cold. Well, does that same thing happen when it's hot? Because it gets hot in Australia an awful lot, regardless of whether you think the cause is climate change or not. This country does get hot. And then the other thing is when vehicles are under load. And obviously, to be able to tow something, I know Bowen was spruiking some ute, but all you have to do is hook a toothbrush onto the tow ball and all of a sudden it only does half the range. So we've got we rely on heavy haulage in this country. You would end up with batteries as heavy as the load weight, and you would actually, just to be able to run that sort of truck with that sort of load, and then all of a sudden you can't run it because it's all too heavy. Like, it just, in a country like Australia, that does not work. And if you want to save the planet, there are other ways you can do it. Recycle your jars, because I reckon by the time that 1 hour trip that should have happened, which I think in that story ended up taking multiple hours, you'd have a nervous breakdown.
Well, you know, I just love these sorts of stories, too, because, you know, right now I think probably about 2/3 of our electricity is coming from coal. So when you see somebody driving an EV, you can say, hey, that's a nice coal-powered car you've got there. Really fantastic stuff. But I want to move on to one...
But it gets even funnier, even funnier.
Gary, go.
Even funnier, James. I'm told by a mate of mine who I am assured is telling me the right story, that in the middle of the Nullarbor Plain, as you run across that magnificent air highway between Adelaide and Perth or thereabouts, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a charging station for your electric vehicle, and the charger is powered by a diesel generator. I just love that story. I think that must be right. Go find that one. That's a real story.
That is fantastic. I've heard variations of that before, so, you know, we'll look into that. But I reckon that's been happening. Now, before you guys go, we're just over a week away. Are you guys excited? Because I know I'm not excited at all about this, but it's pretty interesting anyway. From the release of Prince Harry's book, Spare, as in Spare Me. And The Sun has released some details about what we're expecting to hear. King Charles is set to be let off lightly, and the book will mainly focus on the feud with his brother William and how, unfair it is that he's had to play second fiddle to him his whole life. Gary, no surprise really, but surely Harry is coming dangerously close to coming off as desperate and jealous rather than brave?
Yeah, I think you've said it all there. Look, mate, the whole thing is Cain and Abel-ish, and we know how that ended up in a lot of tears. Look, all I know is that I'm bored to tears about this. I agree the book should be called Spare Me. I won't be buying it, and I understand it's been remanded already in some pre-publication outlets. So we'll all be excited. People like watching sort of these sort of things happen, but it's like watching a slow-moving train crash. It really is.
And very quickly, Caroline, are you going to read the book?
I will read it. Out of morbid curiosity, really, rather than anything. But what I just find so interesting is how Harry has adopted this California therapy couch approach to dealing with your family issues. It's so un-British. It's so undignified. And if you think that this is bad, there was something in the news yesterday which reported that Meghan Markle is going to release her memoirs. So let's hope. I mean, Harry's will be overshadowed by hers in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll wait to hear what you have to say, Caroline Di Russo. Thank you so much, Caroline Di Russo.
Lack of virtue signalling.
And Gary Hargrave, thank you so much for talking about all of these important, weighty issues of the day.